Welcome to Snooze and Muse, where time slows, and the world's greatest stories come gently to life. Tonight, we wander through moonlit ruins and golden streets, past crumbling empires and soaring towers, to discover the cities that built our world not just with stone, but with spirit. From the marble echoes of Rome to the neon pulse of New York, this is a journey through memory, movement, and meaning. So, settle in. Let the lights dim and drift through time, where every city sleeps but never forgets. Chapter 1. Rome, the city that outlived its empire, before it was marble and empire, before the sound of Latin filled its streets. Rome was a quiet place. 7 gentle hills rose near the bend of the Tiber River, not mighty peaks, but soft mounds cradled by forest and river mist. Shepherds grazed their flocks there, and stories passed between generations by firelight. From these hills came the tale of twins, Romulus and Remus. Born of gods and raised by a she-wolf, they were not just characters in myth, they were symbols of Rome's soul. One brother would kill the other, and from that act, a city would be born. A city not founded on peace, but on power. Not with ceremony, but with sacrifice, Rome began not as a capital, but as a gathering. Mud huts, simple fields, small tribes, slowly uniting. Over centuries, it grew not in bursts, but in layers, like the rings of a tree. Each new ruler added stone upon soil, temple upon memory, and still the city whispered of something eternal, of destiny. Romans believed it, that theirs was not a fleeting place, that Rome, whatever it became, would never truly fall. This belief, rooted in story and sustained by ambition, became the foundation of an empire that would shape the world for over 1,000 years, the heart of an empire as Rome's borders stretched far beyond the Italian peninsula, the city itself transformed. What was once a village of shepherds had become the nerve center of the ancient world. Great roads unfurled from Rome like spokes from a wheel, each stone carefully laid to carry soldiers, messengers, and ideas. All roads lead to Rome, not just a phrase, but a truth that defined the ancient world. Merchants crossed deserts. Generals returned from war. And always they came back to Rome. The aqueducts arrived next, long stone arms reaching across miles to bring mountain water into the city. With them came fountains, public baths, and flowing life. Rome was no longer just powerful. It was clean, engineered. A live dot in the heart of the city, the forum buzzed like a living storybook. Senators debated. Orators preached. Citizens voted and gossiped, their voices echoing through arches and marble colonnades. Statues of the gods stood silent, watching history unfold in real time. Then came the Colosseum Grand, terrifying, magnificent, built not just for entertainment, but for spectacle. Gladiators fought beneath awnings of canvas. The roar of crowds shook stone. Rome had become more than a city. It was theater, machine. Symbol at its height, over 1 million people lived here. Artists, slaves, soldiers, scholars, and emperors' men who called themselves gods. Rome was now the capital of half the known world, and every brick, every sculpture, every law it passed whispered one message: order through power, civilization through control, decline and division, but even the brightest flame cast shadows. And Rome, for all its strength, was not immune to time. The signs came slowly. An empire, too large to govern, borders stretched thin by war, economies strained, leadership unstable. The grandeur remained, the marble still gleamed, but beneath it, cracks had begun to form. In the 3rd and 4th centuries, the city saw chaos, plagues, invasions, civil wars. One emperor followed another in dizzying succession. Rome's armies still marched, but often against each other. The world they had conquered began to push back. The empire split into East and West. Constantinople rose, a new Rome in the East. And while the Eastern Empire thrived for centuries, the western half, the Rome of Romulus and Remus, began to fade. In 410, the unthinkable happened. Visigoths, led by Alaric, entered the city. Rome had not been sacked in 800 years. But now it burned. Citizens hid. Temples were looted. The eternal city wept, yet even in loss, Rome left a trace. Its laws shaped future nations. Its language, Latin, seeded the Romance tongues. Its architecture inspired centuries of builders. Rome, the empire, might have declined, but Rome, the idea, endured. It moved through time like a ghost, shaping kingdoms, faiths, and revolutions to come. The papal shift when emperors vanished. Another kind of power rose, softer, slower, but just as enduring. The Church, Rome, became holy ground, not because of its armies, but because of its saints. The tombs of Peter and Paul drew pilgrims from across continents. Slowly, the city once ruled by Caesar began to answer to the cross. By the Middle Ages, popes held power where emperors once stood. They didn't wear crowns of gold, but mitres. Their armies were spiritual. Their empire invisible, carried in scripture, in sermons, in belief. The Vatican rose beside the ruins, not over them, but with them. Old stones were reused. Basilicas replaced forums. Rome did not erase its past, it layered over it. Each new age leaving its imprint, like brushstrokes on an ancient canvas. Renaissance painters walked the same roads as legionnaires once had. Michelangelo painted ceilings beneath domes that stood on Roman foundations. Faith and art danced together. And once more, the world looked to Rome not for law, but for light, and through it all, the city never fully died. It changed, from imperial Rome to papal Rome, from the voice of power to the voice of faith. It was no longer the capital of an empire. It had become something stranger and more eternal, a living monument today. Rome breathes across centuries. You can walk its streets and see time unfold beneath your feet, a bus stop beside a Roman arch, a cafe built into the side of a medieval wall. Tourists sip espresso near fountains that once served legionnaires. Every step is a conversation between past and present. The Colosseum still stands, scarred but proud, not as a place of blood now, but of memory. Its shadow moves slowly across the city each day, like a sundial etched in stone. Beneath the streets, layers of history sleep. Pagan temples lie below Christian churches. Ancient apartments rest under Renaissance plazas. Rome is not just built, it is stacked. A vertical story told in marble, brick and dust. The Tiber still flows, quiet and knowing. It has seen emperors crowned, empires fall, popes rise, and tourists pose. It does not hurry. It remembers dot in Rome. The ancient and the modern do not compete. They exist together. You might hear a Vespa buzz past a 1,000-year-old wall. You might see a nun walk beneath a billboard. Time in Rome is not linear. It loops, and as night falls over the eternal city, golden light catches on stone columns. Bells ring softly from hidden chapels. And the city that once ruled the world settles into silence, not as a ruin, but as a living monument. Rome is not what it was. It is more. It is what it became. A city that outlived its empire, and still whispers to the world. Chapter 2. Athens, the dream of democracy, on the rocky shores of the Aegean Sea, where olive trees twist gently in the sun and soft winds roll across white stone homes, there once stood a city that dared to wonder. Athens was not born of conquest, nor rooted in empire. It was born in thought, in the gentle act of asking why. Long before it became known to the world, Athens was a small place, cradled between hills and sea. Life here was simple. People fished, farmed, and worshipped the gods. But beneath the surface, something stirred, a desire not just to live, but to understand living itself. What is justice? What is truth? What makes a life good or a city fair? These questions didn't echo from temples or palaces. They came from stone benches, shaded courtyards, and dusty corners where people gathered to speak. From farmers and craftsmen, from citizens and thinkers. Their words were not always lofty. Sometimes they were full of doubt. But in that doubt, a kind of beauty bloomed, a belief that truth could be found if you were brave enough to ask. Athens taught the world not to fear the question. And in doing so, it planted seeds of philosophy that would grow across continents and centuries. Here, the mind mattered. And a city began to rise not just in size, but in soul. The Agora and the Acropolis. Athens was built not just of stone, but of space, places where people could meet, speak, and be seen. At the center was the Agora, a public square, alive with sound and life. Merchants sold figs and pottery. Children laughed as they chased one another across sun-warmed stones. And citizens gathered, not just to trade goods, but ideas. Here, the air was thick with conversation. Men debated the laws. Elders taught the young. Philosophers paced slowly, asking passers-by about courage, love, and virtue. You could spend the day in the Agora and leave with no coin in your pocket, but your mind full, your heart stirred. Not far off, the Acropolis rose like a crown above the city, a sacred hill where temples reached toward the sky. The Parthenon stood at its peak, glowing gold and white in the sun, its columns strong, balanced, and serene, built for Athena, goddess of wisdom, The Parthenon was more than a temple, it was a symbol, a mirror of the Athenian mind, thoughtful, ordered, devoted to beauty. From the Acropolis, you could see the city stretch toward the sea. Ships came and went, sails blooming like petals across the bay. The hills hummed with life. Athens was not large, but it pulsed with purpose, and always, at its heart, were these spaces the Agora and the Acropolis, where the sacred and the civic danced together, where people asked not just how to live, but how to live well. Pericles and the Golden Age, the soul of a city, is not always easy to see. But in the time of Pericles, Athens wore its soul proudly. He was not a king. Athens had no kings. Pericles was a statesman chosen, not crowned, and under his guidance, Athens bloomed. This was the city's golden age, a time when light seemed to spill from every marble carving, every open-air theater, every painted vase. Architecture soared. Temples were rebuilt with care and grandeur. The Parthenon, with its perfect proportions, became the pride of the city. Its columns told stories of gods, of battles, of a people who believed in harmony. Drama came alive in the hills. Tragedies and comedies played out under open skies. Playwrights like Sophocles and Euripides shaped human emotion into stories that still move us today. Their tales were not simple entertainment. They were reflections, warnings. Mirrors held up to life, art flourished. Potters etched scenes of everyday life into clay. Sculptors gave stone the softness of skin. Painters filled walls with color and grace. And always there was learning. The great thinkers walked among the people. Socrates, with his gentle voice and piercing questions. He believed wisdom came not from answers, but from recognizing one's ignorance. His student, Plato, would carry those lessons into the academy, a school unlike any before it. And Aristotle, Plato's pupil, would go on to shape science, politics, and philosophy for generations. Under Pericles, Athens was not just alive. It was awake. It believed in balance between freedom and order, reason and faith, beauty and truth. The city had become a light in the ancient world. And for a moment, it seemed that light would never dim. The Peloponnesian shadow, but no light, no matter how bright, shines without casting shadows. And for Athens, that shadow came in the form of Sparta, the disciplined and quiet city to the south, where boys were trained for war from childhood, where words were fewer and walls were taller. For years, the two cities coexisted, different but powerful. Yet as Athens grew in wealth and pride, tension swelled. Allies chose sides. Warnings were spoken. Then came war, the Peloponnesian War, a long, bitter conflict that would test Athens to its core. At first, the city was confident. It had ships, strategy, and spirit. But war is not only fought with strength, it's also measured in time. And time wore Athens down, a plague struck. Thousands died. Even Pericles fell. The city's soul, once lifted by reason and beauty, began to fray. Battles dragged on. Resources thinned. Morale withered. And slowly, that once golden city dulled. Sparta eventually won. But there were no true victors. Athens, exhausted and humbled, would never be the same. Its empire faded. Its influence shrank. The agora grew quiet. The Acropolis weathered wind and rain. But even in defeat, something remained: the dream, the questions, the idea that a city could be built not just with walls and wealth, but with words and wonder. Echoes in every constitution. Athens no longer rules the seas. Its theaters do not hold thousands. Its fleet is gone. Its empire, a memory. But its voice still echoes. In the halls of universities where students still read Plato. In courtrooms where laws are debated. In parliaments and congresses, where people vote, speak, and serve. The idea of democracy, that people should rule themselves, was not perfect in Athens. Only citizens could vote, and many were excluded. But the seed was there, a system where power was shared, where leaders could be questioned, where truth was not dictated, but discovered. The spirit of Athens can be found in every constitution written by free people. In every nation that dares to ask how it can be better, its philosophers shaped the way we think. Its poets gave us the tools to feel. Its artists taught us to see beauty in truth, and truth in beauty. And though centuries have passed, the questions asked in Athens are still with us. What makes a good life? What is justice? How should we live together? The answers may change, but the questions remain, and so does the dream, not of an empire, but of a city where thought itself is sacred. Athens was not the largest, nor the richest, but it dared to wonder, and in that wonder it became eternal. Chapter 3. Constantinople, city of empires, at the edge of Europe and the threshold of Asia, where seas shimmer like silver and winds carry voices from two worlds, a city rose. It was born not just of geography, but of vision placed where land narrows and waters widen, where history gathers in tides. Constantinople was its name, a name given in honor of an emperor who dared to dream of a new Rome, one not burdened by the past, but shaped by possibility. Constantine saw a city that could be both shield and sword, both temple and throne, a place that would outlast emperors and empires alike. Its location was no accident. With the Sea of Marmara to the south, the Bosphorus Strait to the east, and the Golden Horn curling into its northern shores, the city was a natural fortress. Trade ships passed through daily, their sails full and colorful, their hulls heavy with silk, spice, and stories. Caravans came from the east, carrying ivory and ink. Merchants from the west brought silver and wine, but beyond commerce, Constantinople held something rarer. It was a crossroads of cultures, languages, and beliefs. It was where East met West, not in battle, but in exchange. Ideas moved here, quietly, like whispers through alleyways and across tiled courtyards. In its streets, one might hear Latin, Greek, Arabic, Armenian, and Turkish, each voice part of a larger conversation spanning centuries. Constantinople was never just a city. It was a mirror to the world and a window into what it could become. Byzantine brilliance. From the ashes of Rome's western fall rose something unexpected, a second life for its eastern half. Constantinople became the heart of this new chapter, The Byzantine Empire. It was not merely a continuation, but a transformation. Rome had ruled with legions. Byzantium ruled with light, with art, architecture, and faith woven into every inch of its being. The center, stood the Hagia Sophia, a church unlike any before it, where stone seemed to float and space itself felt sacred. Its dome rose like the sky, wide and soft, held not by columns, but by engineering so precise it seemed divine. Sunlight streamed through its windows like grace. Inside, gold mosaics shimmered with scenes of saints and emperors. Each tiny tile, each piece of glass placed with care, together forming visions of holiness that glowed in silence. Icons lined the walls, tender, solemn faces, painted with devotion. Their eyes seemed to meet your own, not stern, not distant, but knowing. This was not art for decoration. It was worship in form. A bridge between heaven and earth. Byzantine Constantinople did not chase power with armies alone. It whispered through liturgy, through the slow swirl of incense, through hymns echoing in candlelit halls. It carried relics, bones of saints, drops of holy oil, and with them, memory and meaning. It was a city of processions and parades, of velvet and violet robes. Emperors walked beneath golden canopies. Patriarchs blessed crowds with relics, said to hold centuries of faith. Even its coins bore the image of Christ, as if the city itself were under divine protection. In Constantinople, empire became ritual, power became sacred, and beauty became a kind of prayer. Walls and waters, while faith lit its heart, stone guarded its borders. For over 1,000 years, the city stood behind some of the most formidable defenses ever built by human hands. The Theodosian walls, massive, layered, and legendary. They wrapped around Constantinople like arms, wide and strong. There were 3 layers: an outer moat, a middle wall, and a towering inner wall. Together they stretched 4 miles, broken only by gates and towers. Soldiers walked atop them, day and night, watching the horizons. These walls turned back armies: Persians, Arabs, Rus, Bulgars, time and again. They were not merely barriers. They were the reason Constantinople became known as the Queen of cities, a place that did not fall, a place that could not. But the city was not protected by land alone. The waters helped too. The Golden Horn, a natural harbor, curled like a hook along its edge. Across it, a great chain could be drawn, thick iron, and menacing to stop enemy ships before they could reach the docks. In times of siege, the people of Constantinople didn't run. They gathered. They prayed. They trusted their walls, their waters, and their wits, and for centuries it was enough. The city endured storms of fire and steel. When the rest of the world crumbled or shifted, Constantinople remained. Proud, defiant, whole. Its survival became its legend, and its legend a kind of armor, the fall of a beacon. But even stone weathers. Even legends grow old. In 1453, after more than 1,000 years of standing strong, the city faced its final siege. And this time, it would not endure. the Ottoman Empire had grown bold, and its young sultan, Mehmed II, was determined. At just 21, he brought an army of thousands to the gates of Constantinople. With him came a weapon new to war, massive cannons, forged to break what had never been broken. For 57 days, the city resisted. Night and day, the walls shook. Smoke filled the skies. The people prayed, as they always had, beneath the dome of the Hagia Sophia, but the world had changed. Gunpowder spoke louder than stone. And on May 29th, the Ottomans breached the walls. The fall was brutal. Streets once filled with quiet chants now rang with footsteps, steel and fire. The golden cross atop Hagia Sophia was lowered. In its place, a crescent rose, but this was not the end. It was a transformation. Mehmed entered the city, not just as a conqueror, but as a visionary. He preserved many churches. He reopened markets. He welcomed people of many faiths. And he renamed the city Istanbul. The Hagia Sophia became a mosque, its mosaics covered, not destroyed. A new kind of beauty entered its halls. And though the chant had changed, the building still sang. Where one empire ended, another began. And the city battered, bruised, but breathing stepped into a new chapter. From Constantine to Atat-Rike, few cities have worn so many names, heard so many prayers, flown so many flags, and yet remained, at their core, the same from Byzantium to Constantinople. From Constantinople to Istanbul, the empires changed. Roman, Byzantine, Ottoman. So did the faiths. Pagan, Christian, Islamic. But the city stayed adjusting, absorbing, adapting. Through each age, it became not smaller, but richer. Its skyline shifted. Minarets joined domes. Palaces rose beside ruins. Bridges spanned the waters that once divided in the 20th century. Yet another transformation came not by siege, but by reform. Mustafa Kemal Atat-Rike, founder of modern Turkey, redefined the nation and the city. He moved the capital to Ankara, but Istanbul remained its soul. He turned Hagia Sophia into a museum, a place for all faiths, all people, to see and reflect. The city became modern, but never forgot its past. Trams rolled where emperors once marched. Neon signs lit streets older than many nations. Istanbul today holds multitudes. It is call to prayer and church bell. It is coffee in a quiet courtyard and traffic on a bridge between continents. A tea is where time folds, where yesterday feels near, and tomorrow feels welcome. From Constantine to Atat-Rike, the city has remained a singular heartbeat in the rhythm of history. Its story is not linear. It is layered. Like the mosaics that once shimmered in the Hagia Sophia, small pieces, broken, beautiful, coming together to form something whole. And as night falls over its hills and waters, the city does not sleep. It dreams always of what comes next. Chapter 4, Baghdad, the House of Wisdom, where the waters of the Tigris shimmer beneath an endless sky. A city once rose with careful intention and extraordinary hope. Baghdad was not an accident. It was a dream made real, designed from the beginning as a center of brilliance, power, and beauty. It began in the year 762, when Caliph al-Mansur, the second Abbasid ruler, chose this quiet bend in the river to build something the world had never seen. He envisioned a city that was round a perfect circle to reflect order, unity, and divine harmony. Its design came not from conquest, but from calculation. At its heart stood the Caliph's palace and the great mosque. From there, walls curved outward in even rings, wrapped by protective gates and towers. Streets flowed like the spokes of a wheel, drawing people toward the center, toward power and purpose. The city was called Madinat al-Salam, the city of peace. And for a time, it was. Gold domes rose against the desert sky. Markets buzzed with life. People from all parts of the Islamic world came here, merchants, scholars, artists, poets. They brought not only spices and cloth, but questions and dreams. Baghdad quickly became more than a capital. It was a mirror of civilization's highest hopes, a city built not just to govern, but to think. Golden age of knowledge in the centuries that followed, Baghdad became the brightest star in the Islamic world. The caliphs, especially Harun al-Rashid and his son al-Mamun, were not only rulers, they were patrons of knowledge. At the center of this intellectual flowering stood Beit al-Hikmah, the house of wisdom. Not a library, not a school, but something greater. A place where knowledge from across the world was gathered, translated, discussed, and expanded. Greek texts arrived, brought from far corners of the old Roman world. Scrolls from India followed. Works in Syriac, Persian, and Sanskrit lined its shelves. Scholars fluent in many tongues worked day and night to preserve and transform the wisdom of civilizations past. Here, mathematics found new language. The Indian numerals became the foundation for what we now call Arabic numerals. Algebra was born. Geometry was refined. Astronomers mapped the stars with clarity. Physicians wrote detailed guides to surgery, illness, and the body's many mysteries. This was not knowledge for the elite. Baghdad's thinkers believed in sharing. Hospitals were built with teaching wings. Astronomy was used to guide prayer and navigation. Paper, imported from China, made books more common. Ideas flowed outward like the rivers around the city, and in every field, from chemistry to cartography, from poetry to philosophy, Baghdad pulsed with light. Not just the light of lamps and lanterns, but the brighter glow of understanding. The city had become a beacon, a place where science and faith, reason and revelation stood not in opposition, but in conversation, stories of silk and paper while scholars debated the nature of stars and soul. Another kind of magic spread through the city, the magic of storytelling. Baghdad was a city of words. In its markets, stories passed like currency. On its streets, tales rose with the scent of spices and the sound of flutes. The greatest of these stories would be gathered into a collection known across the world, the 1001 Nights. These were not just bedtime tales. They were reflections of the city's soul, layered, clever, wise. Within them danced kings and thieves, jinn and dreamers, merchants and mystics. And always the voice of Scheherazade telling tales not only to entertain, but to survive. She spoke each night with purpose, weaving stories into life, and life into legend, alongside these tales grew something else: institutions devoted to learning. Baghdad became home to some of the earliest models of the university. Scholars gathered, not only in the House of Wisdom, but in homes, mosques, and open courtyards. They copied texts. They taught students. They argued gently and thoughtfully, sometimes for hours, sometimes for years. Books were everywhere. Calligraphers worked with care and reverence, turning ink and paper into objects of beauty. The Arabic script, already graceful, became a sacred art form. Silk from China, scrolls from Byzantium, perfumes from India, all arrived in the city. And through them, Baghdad became not just a place on a map, but a living crossroads of imagination and intellect. To walk through Baghdad then was to wander through worlds, through myths and maps, formulas and fables. The air was thick with learning, and the walls, it seemed, listened. The Mongol fire, but no city, however wise or beautiful, is immune to time. In the year 1258, something terrible came from the east. The Mongol armies, led by Hulagu Khan, descended upon Baghdad. They were swift, ruthless, and unrelenting. The Caliph was captured. The gates were opened. And then the burning began. For 7 days fire raged. The House of Wisdom, that great treasure of thought, was destroyed. Its books were thrown into the Tigris. Witnesses said the river ran black with ink, red with blood. The destruction was not only physical, it was cultural, emotional, spiritual. A silence followed, not of peace, but of absence. The voices of scholars and poets, physicians and storytellers, quieted in an instant. The city that once glowed with knowledge became a ghost. Its domes shattered, its libraries dust, its dreams buried beneath rubble and ash. And yet, even in its fall, Baghdad left behind something the Mongols could not destroy. Memory carried forward, because knowledge, once kindled, is hard to kill. It travels on paper, in memory, in spirit. The works saved from Baghdad found homes in Cairo, Damascus, Fez, and Rhoda. Translations reached Europe, where they sparked new questions, new learning. Latin scholars read texts preserved by Muslim thinkers. Algebra entered Christian classrooms. Astronomical charts guided European sailors toward new continents. In this way, Baghdad shaped the Renaissance long after its own light dimmed. Even as the city fell quiet, its wisdom walked forward. In every observatory that mapped the stars, in every university that taught both reason and reverence, in every library that placed science and poetry side by side, a piece of Baghdad lived on. And in modern times, even as the city has suffered again from war, from violence, from political storms, its name still calls to something older, something eternal, the idea that human beings, no matter their faith or origin, can come together to seek understanding, that books are sacred, that stories matter, that a city built for knowledge becomes more than a place, it becomes a promise. Baghdad was once the heart of the world's learning. And though fire stole its voice, the echo remains. In every question asked, in every story shared, in every hand that opens a book, hoping to find something more. Chapter 5. Beijing, the Dragon's Throne, tucked between mountains and plains, where northern winds whisper over stone and earth, there lies a city of quiet paradox. Beijing, at once a fortress and a crossroad, a place of secrets and a gateway to the world. For centuries, it was the heart of the Chinese Empire, but its heart beat behind walls, hidden from all but a few. At the center was the Forbidden City, a palace complex so grand, so carefully measured, it seemed less built than conjured. But beyond those red walls, the city opened outward east to the sea, west toward deserts, and far beyond along the veins of the Silk Road. Caravans carried porcelain and jade, silk and scrolls. They left Beijing's gates bound for Samarkand, for Persia, for Rome. They carried more than goods. They carried pieces of the Middle Kingdom's soul, even as merchants moved under open skies. The emperor ruled behind silence. The Forbidden City was named not for its mystery, but its control. Only those summoned could pass through its golden gates. Commoners remained outside. Yet all knew what lay within mattered, because Beijing was not just a city. It was a symbol. Everything from the wide avenues aligned with the stars to the number of roof tiles on the halls was arranged to reflect balance, harmony, and heaven's will. Here, dragons curled across walls, cranes perched on rooftops. The city was alive with meaning and still, so very still, the mandate of heaven in China. Rulers did not claim power by birthright alone. They ruled by divine approval, a concept known as the mandate of heaven. If a dynasty ruled justly, with wisdom and balance, it retained the mandate. But should it falter through corruption, famine, or unrest, heaven would revoke its favor. Beijing stood as witness to this eternal cycle. Dynasties rose and fell, but the city endured. Like a calm stone in the river of time, it watched rulers come and go. The Yuan dynasty, Mongol in origin, first made Beijing its true capital. Under Kublai Khan, it was called Dadu, the great capital, and became the hub of a vast empire stretching across Asia. It was from here that Marco Polo would enter, awed by its order, its grandeur, and its strange calm. After the Yuan, the Ming dynasty took hold, and with them, Beijing was rebuilt not just in stone, but in spirit. The city became more than a throne. It became a mirror of the emperor's mind and of China itself. The king came next, sweeping down from the north. They were not Han Chinese, but Manchu. Yet they embraced Beijing and were embraced in return. They preserved the rituals, the halls, the language of rule. And for nearly 300 years, they held the mandate inside Beijing's palaces. The court followed strict rhythms. Every robe, every gesture, every word had meaning. Yet beyond the rituals lay a quiet strength, a belief that China was the center of the world, and that Beijing, at its center, was the breath of heaven itself, Ming walls and King Calm great. Cities are shaped not only by ideas, but by what they build and what they keep out. Under the Ming dynasty, Beijing saw the expansion of one of the world's most ambitious defenses, the Great Wall. Though walls had existed for centuries, it was under the Ming that they were bound together, stretched across mountains and deserts, stone by stone. Like a ribbon drawn across the edge of empire, the wall did not always stop invaders. But it stood as a statement of permanence, of vigilance, of pride, inside Beijing. Something else was built, something quieter, but no less powerful. The Forbidden City.it was not merely a palace. It was a world. Nearly 1,000 buildings, golden-roofed and red-walled, arranged in perfect symmetry. Each courtyard led to another, each gate to another layer of control. The deeper you went, the fewer were allowed. At its heart sat the emperor, the Son of Heaven, not just a man, but a bridge between earth and the divine around the palace. The city grew with wide streets, watchtowers and drum towers to mark the hours. Parks bloomed in the north. Lakes shimmered behind high walls. And all of it flowed with a strange stillness, like a scroll painting slowly unfurling across. Time under the king. Beijing softened but did not sleep. Culture thrived. Poetry was penned in quiet study rooms. Gardens were shaped with rocks and flowing water, reflecting Taoist ideals of harmony. Scrolls and brushwork, jade carvings and bronze castings, beauty in balance, the emperors aged in. The shade of cypress trees. And the city, ancient and still, breathed slowly, calmly, under king rule, foreign shadows and national rebirth. But no empire lasts forever. And even the walls of Beijing could not hold back the winds of change. In the 19th century, the world came knocking not with gifts, but with gunboats. Western powers, hungry for trade and territory, forced their way in. Treaties were signed. Under pressure, palaces were looted. Foreign legations appeared, and with them, tension. The Boxer Rebellion erupted, a desperate, doomed effort to push foreigners out. It failed. Foreign troops marched into Beijing. The Forbidden City was entered by those who once stood outside. The Dragon Throne trembled. Then, in 1911, the final emperor was overthrown. The Qing dynasty, and with it, the imperial system, came to an end. The boy emperor, Pui, lived in silent splendor, stripped of power, but allowed to stay in the palace, a child among ghosts. What followed was chaos. Warlords, invasions, civil war. Beijing changed hands more than once. It was no longer the capital. It was wounded proud, but broken. Then came the revolution. In 1949, Mao Zedong declared the founding of the People's Republic of China. The capital returned to Beijing, and with it, a new era began, one of factories and slogans, of sweeping change and quiet loss. Temples were destroyed. Scrolls burned. The old city, with its courtyards and traditions, began to fade. And yet, it never vanished, because even under concrete, memory survives. Past in every courtyard today, Beijing stretches wide. Skyscrapers reach into skies once empty. Highways hum with motion. Neon flickers where lanterns once glowed, but if you walk slowly, if you turn from the wide roads and enter the narrow alleys, the hutongs, you will find the past waiting, gray brick walls, red wooden doors, stone lions guarding homes. In these quiet courtyards, families still gather. Tea still steams in porcelain cups. And the rhythm of old Beijing, slow, respectful, steady, lingers. The Forbidden City still stands. Its golden roofs shine beneath the modern skyline. Tourists whisper in its echoing halls. But the stones remember. The floors are worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The paint faded by time, not forgotten, and beyond the palace, the city lives in layers. A subway train passes beneath a Confucian temple. Children play beside a centuries-old gate. A smartphone camera captures a stone dragon, carved long before the world knew of screens. Beijing is no longer the city of emperors, but it is still. The dragon's throne in spirit, in story, in shadow. It has carried the weight of dynasties, the fire of revolution, and the breath of rebirth. And it remains not because it resisted change, but because it absorbed it. Like a river bending around stones, flowing always forward. In Beijing, history does not sleep. It walks. It waits. It watches, and in every corner, every courtyard, every quiet alley, it whispers. Chapter 6. Alexandria, the city that sought to know everything. In the 4th century BC, a conqueror stood on the edge of Egypt's northern coast. His name was Alexander, a young king who had already crossed deserts and toppled empires. But here, beside the calm blue of the Mediterranean Sea, he made a decision not of war, but of wonder. He ordered a city to be built, a new city that would bear his name. Alexandria. It began not with temples or fortresses, but with lines traced into sand. Architects laid out broad avenues, open harbors, and high walls. They followed the stars to guide their plans, believing that the city's design should mirror the order of the heavens. Though Alexander would never return, he died before seeing the city finished. His vision echoed far beyond his lifetime. Others came after him, and under their care, Alexandria grew quickly. It became not just a capital, but a crossroads. Not just a port, but a purpose. Ships filled the harbors. Merchants came with goods. But it was what came with the merchants' words, scrolls, thoughts that transformed Alexandria into something rare. The city was not meant only to hold riches. It was meant to hold knowledge. And in that quiet, deliberate mission, Alexandria found its soul. The library and the lighthouse at the center of Alexandria's ambition stood two marvels. One reached into the sky. The other reached into the mind. The first was the lighthouse of Pharaohs. Built on a small island just off the coast, it rose higher than any structure of its time, nearly 400 feet tall. Day and night, a fire blazed. At its peak, polished mirrors reflected its light across the sea, guiding ships safely home. For sailors, it was a beacon. For the world, a symbol of Alexandria's brilliance. But it was the second wonder that defined the city's heart. The great library of Alexandria, founded during the reign of Ptolemy I and expanded by his son. The library was unlike anything the world had seen. It wasn't just a collection of scrolls. It was a sanctuary of thought, a living archive of everything humanity knew or hoped to understand. It is said the library once held hundreds of thousands of scrolls copied. Texts from Greece, Persia, India, Egypt, even the distant lands of China. No ship could dock in Alexandria without surrendering its written cargo. These works were copied, studied, and stored, becoming part of the city's growing archive. But the library was more than a vault. It was a workshop, a think tank, a place where scholars lived, debated, and dreamed. Mathematicians, astronomers, poets, doctors all came here, drawn by the promise of knowledge freely explored. Here, Euclid refined the rules of geometry. Eratosthenes measured the circumference of the earth, using only shadows and math. Galen advanced medicine. Hypatia, one of history's first notable female philosophers, taught astronomy and ethics with calm authority. The library welcomed all who sought to understand. It was, in spirit, a lighthouse to one that cast not fire, but thought. Pharaohs, philosophers, and priests Alexandria thrived not only because of what it built, but because of who it welcomed. It was a city of convergence where cultures did not just coexist, but collided and collaborated. Greek ideals met Egyptian mystery. Jewish tradition met Roman law. Each voice brought something, and in the mixing, something new emerged. Pharaohs once ruled here, their temples towering beside Greek theaters. Priests walked the streets in flowing linen robes, while philosophers discussed ethics in the shade of marble columns. There were shrines to Isis, discussions of Aristotle, and scrolls of Hebrew scripture, all in the same city. The Jewish community of Alexandria grew large and influential. Their scholars translated sacred texts into Greek, a version known as the Septuagint, which would influence both Christian and Islamic thought in centuries to come. Meanwhile, scientists studied the stars. Physicians performed surgeries. Writers recorded history, poetry, and politics. No subject was too small, no question too grand. The city believed that knowledge was sacred and that no one people or tradition owned it. The streets hummed with multiple languages. The harbor echoed with many prayers. And in this symphony, Alexandria became more than a city. It became an idea that all the world's wisdom, when gathered in one place, could build something greater than any empire. Tragedy in the flames, but ideas, like buildings, are fragile. And light, even the brightest, can be extinguished. The decline came not all at once, but in waves. War, politics, fire, the library that great keeper of thought burned. No one knows exactly how, or how many times. Some say it was Julius Caesar's troops who first set the scrolls aflame. Others say later rulers, fearing knowledge, let it fall into neglect. There is no single moment. 2.2. No record of when the last scroll turned to ash. But one day, the doors closed. The scholars were gone. The shelves stood empty. The light went out. Hypatia, the last great thinker of Alexandria's golden age, was murdered in the streets. A mob, fueled by fear, and power silenced her voice. With her death, the city lost more than a teacher. It lost its soul. The lighthouse eventually crumbled, brought down by earthquakes. The sea reclaimed the island of Pharaohs. And the great city of learning faded into shadow, but flames do not destroy everything. Some sparks drift. Some embers survive. Legacy of inquiry. What Alexandria started did not end with fire. It simply moved. The scrolls that were copied, the ideas shared, the methods taught, they found new homes. In Byzantine Constantinople, in the Islamic world's golden age. In the monasteries of Europe, the structure of the atom, the curve of the earth, the shape of the universe, all bear traces of work begun in Alexandria when Muslim scholars translated ancient Greek texts in Baghdad. Many of those had once been stored in Alexandria. When Renaissance thinkers looked to rediscover ancient truths, they found echoes that began here on the shores of the Nile, even today. The spirit of the library lives on in every research center, every telescope, every question asked. In the quiet hours of night, and Alexandria itself, though changed, still stands. Fishermen cast nets in its harbor. Tourists walk the remains of its ancient streets. A new library now rises where the old one fell, the Bibliotheca Alexandrina, a modern place of light, built to remember what was lost and to imagine what still could be found, because knowledge, once awakened, never truly sleeps. It waits. It watches. It whispers, and Alexandria, the city that dared to know everything, still listens. Chapter 7, Mecca, in the vast stretch of the Arabian desert, where sun and silence reign, there is a place unlike any other, a city that did not rise with armies or empire, but with faith. That city is Mecca. Before the rise of Islam, Mecca was a caravan town, humble, hot, and surrounded by rocky hills. It was not a seat of government. It held no palace or great library, but it had something older, something sacred. At its heart stood the Kaaba, a cube-shaped building, simple in form, yet ancient in reverence. Surrounded by tribal gods and desert myths, the Kaaba had long been a place of pilgrimage. Even then, people came to circle it, to pray, to reflect. The Quraysh tribe, caretakers of the Kaaba, kept the peace, and trade flowed through the region. Camels loaded with frankincense and cloth arrived from Yemen, Damascus, and beyond. Stories were exchanged. Poetry echoed in evening gatherings. And in this blend of commerce and tradition, Mecca found its rhythm, but the Kaaba, that silent, dark stone, remained the city's true center. It was not loud. It did not shine. But it drew hearts to it. Then and now, the prophet's city, everything changed in the 7th century, when a man named Muhammad received words in a cave near Mecca. These were not the words of merchants or poets, but verses that spoke of one God, of justice, of mercy, of oneness. He spoke gently at first. 2 friends, 2 family. But Mecca was not ready. The city, tied to its tribal past, resisted change. Muhammad and his followers were harassed, threatened, and finally forced to leave. They fled to Yathrib, a city that would become Medina, but Mecca was not forgotten. It could not be. Years later, the prophet returned, not with swords, but with forgiveness. The Kaaba, once surrounded by idols, was cleared. Its silence returned, and with it, a new chapter began. Mecca became the holiest city in Islam, not because it grew rich, but because it held the place where direction itself was born. Wherever Muslims are in the world, from mountain villages to coastal cities, they turn toward Mecca when they pray. T is not a political capital. It holds no throne, but it is the axis of billions of lives. A center not of power, but of peace, the Hajj, and the journey within every year. In the 12th month of the Islamic calendar, millions begin a journey. Some travel across oceans. Some cross deserts. Others walk for days. Their destination is the same Mecca. The pilgrimage is called the Hajj, and it is one of Islam's 5 pillars of sacred duty, once in a lifetime, for all who are able. But it is not a journey of tourism or spectacle. It is a journey inward, a path not just to a place, but to reflection, humility, and transformation. Upon arrival, the pilgrim changes. The clothes are stripped of identity: white robes for men, modest dress for women. Everyone becomes equal here. No ranks, no status, just hearts seeking mercy. The rituals are old, unchanged for over 1,000 years. Circling the Kaaba, walking between the hills of Safa and Marwa, standing in stillness at Arafat, where the Prophet gave his final sermon. Each act is simple, yet full of meaning. To circle the Kaaba is to remember that life, too, revolves around a center greater than ourselves. To walk the hills is to recall Hagar's desperate search for water and the mercy that followed. To stand at Arafat is to feel time stretch from then to now to always. The Hajj is not a performance. It is a return, a shedding, a remembering, and when the pilgrim leaves Mecca, they carry not just memories, but change. A softer heart, a deeper peace, a bond with millions who have walked the same path, sacred stillness amid change over the centuries. Mecca has grown. Towers rise now where sand once stretched. Hotels, railways, and roads bring the world closer. Pilgrims can fly in hours where once they rode for weeks. But for all the change the center holds, the Kaaba remains a black cube wrapped in silk, resting on stone. It has no ornament, no throne, no voice. Yet it moves millions around it. In perfect circles, pilgrims walk day and night, sun and storm. No music plays, no announcements call. Yet everyone knows the steps. This dance of devotion is older than any empire. The city around the Kaaba moves faster now: skyscrapers, shops, screens. But the Kaaba does not change. It needs no defense. It speaks without speaking. In the stillness, Mecca offers something rare. The chance to pause. Listen not to the world's noise, but to the quiet inside ourselves. A city of silence and devotion. Mecca is unlike any other great city. It did not conquer, though many tried to conquer it. It did not rule, though it guided kings and empires. Its power does not come from what it commands, but from what it calls. People do not come here to take. They come to give their time, their ego, their longing. And in return, they leave lighter. In Mecca, there are no statues of generals, no halls of gold. What there is space. Space for surrender. Space for prayer. Space for a moment of truth. At night, when the lights dim and the sky stretches wide, the Kaaba still stands. And around it, the world flows in circles, in silence, in devotion, a heartbeat felt not through sound, but presence. Through a center that holds, even as the world spins fast around it. This is Mecca. The pilgrim's heartbeat, a city not of walls, but of welcome, not of noise, but of nearness, and always, always a reminder that in stillness we sometimes find everything. Chapter 8. Kyoto, the soul of old Japan, in the gentle basin of Japan's Honshu Island, surrounded by mountains that blush with maple leaves in autumn and cherry blossoms in spring, rests a city that has known stillness for centuries. Kyoto. For over 1,000 years, it was the imperial heart of Japan. Not always the largest, not always the most powerful, but always, somehow, the most serene, founded in 794 as Heian Kai, the capital of peace and tranquility. It was chosen not by chance, but by ritual. Feng Shui and spiritual readings guided its placement. Rivers flowed on either side. Mountains framed the horizon. The city was designed like a mandala, symmetrical, sacred, centered. The emperor lived here, beneath layered roofs and in rooms of tatami mats. But Kyoto did not rush. It unfolded slowly, a city shaped by restraint, where palaces stood with elegance, not excess, where the seasons were honored not with parades, but with poetry. Here, time moved differently. And though the capital would one day shift to Tokyo, Kyoto never truly lost its crown, because it was not just Japan's seat of power. It was and still is its soul, temples, gardens, and the art of quiet. To walk through Kyoto is to step into a living canvas. Temples rise among trees, each one a breath of stillness. Kinkaku-ji, the golden pavilion, reflects perfectly in the pond before it. Its gold leaf shimmers in the light, not to dazzle, but to remind of balance, of impermanence, of beauty that does not need to speak loudly. Nearby, Ryan-ji's rock garden whispers its own truths. 15 stones rest in carefully raked white gravel. Their placement is not random, and yet, no matter where you stand, you cannot see them all at once. A lesson, perhaps, that understanding comes with patience. Not all at once. In the spring, Kyoto wears a soft pink crown. Sakura trees bloom along the philosopher's path. Their petals drift like snow, landing on rivers, on robes, on pages of half-finished haiku. In Arashiyama, the bamboo forest sways with a breeze that sounds like breath. Tall stalks creak and sigh. The sun filters through in green, golden lines. It is not loud. It is not grand. But it holds you still. Kyoto does not entertain. It invites. Tea is served in silence. Gardens are tended with reverence. Even in architecture, less is more. Paper walls, open spaces, the deliberate beauty of nothing extra. It is a city built not to impress, but to calm the soul. War and the way of the warrior. Even the quietest places are not free from history's weight. Over centuries, Kyoto was touched by war. The samurai rose. Clans battled. Empires shifted. Fires came. And yet, something about the city held steady. It was never a city of soldiers. But many passed through. During the Onin War in the 15th century, Kyoto burned. Whole districts vanished, but temples remained. So did the gardens. And from the ashes, the city bloomed again, more deliberate, more inward, more refined. The samurai warriors bound by Bushido, the way of honor, often came to Kyoto, not for battle, but for balance, to meditate, to study poetry and calligraphy. For even they understood that to fight well, one must first understand stillness, this balance between sword and scroll, between war and wisdom, gave Kyoto a rare grace. It was not untouched by violence, but it was never defined by it. The streets may have narrowed with time, but they never lost their path, spared by a whisper in the 20th century. As World War II darkened skies around the globe, Kyoto stood in a shadow once more. And this time, the threat came from the air. Japan had entered total war. Cities burned across the country. Firebombs fell like rain. And in secret rooms across the ocean, a list was made of targets for the atomic bomb. Kyoto is on that list. Its railways, its population, its morale value, all marked it as a candidate. But then, something changed. A voice, or perhaps a whisper, intervened. Historians still debate the reason. Some say U.S. Secretary of War Henry Stimson, who had once honeymooned there, understood its value. Not strategic, not political, but cultural. Others say military advisors saw no need. Kyoto, they argued, was not industrial, but whatever the reason, the city was spared. The bomb fell elsewhere, and so Kyoto remained. Whole, quiet. Breathing.it was not untouched by the war. But unlike so many cities, its temples still stood. Its streets still curved with memory. And its soul, the delicate blend of past and presence, remained intact, eternal refinement today. Kyoto lives between worlds. It has bullet trains and neon signs. It has tourists and traffic. But beneath it all, something older still hums dot in the early morning. Monks still sweep temple courtyards. Tea houses open their doors with soft clicks. Kimono fabric rustles quietly as a geisha passes through a narrow lane in Gion. The city has changed, but it has not hurried. Crafts are still done by hand, the slow weaving of obi sashes, the carving of fans, the painting of porcelain. Each task done not for speed, but for beauty, for care. Even modern Kyoto respects its lines. Buildings rise low, not high. Glass is used, but rarely to outshine the past. Nature is not pushed out. It is invited in. Visitors come in thousands. Some seek photographs. Others find something quiet or a moment of peace, a reminder of what stillness can give. Kyoto does not boast. It does not command. It reflects. It reflects the mountain light. It reflects the values of 1,000 years. And it reflects gently a version of Japan that still believes in balance. This is Kyoto, the soul of old Japan. A place that has seen centuries pass, and yet continues to whisper, be still, look closely, breathe slowly, remember. Chapter 9. Jerusalem, the city of three faiths, high on a plateau in the Judean hills, where light falls gently on limestone and prayers rise with the morning air, there stands a city that carries the weight of belief like no other. Jerusalem.it is not large. It is not rich. And yet, its soil has been walked by prophets, its skies shaped by visions, and its stones soaked with longing. Few places have been so loved. Fewer still have been so fought over for over 3,000 years. Jerusalem has been a destination. For the Spirit, a point where heaven seems just a little closer. For Jews, it is the city of David, of Solomon, of exile and return. For Christians, it is the place where Jesus walked, wept, and rose. For Muslims, it is where the Prophet Muhammad is believed to have ascended to the heavens. This is not just sacred ground. It is contested ground, desired, claimed, protected, but before the scriptures and temples and shrines, it was simply a hilltop city of stone and silence. And even now, beneath the noise of history, that silence still echoes if you know how. To listen, stone and story in Jerusalem. Every step tells a story. The city is small, the old city, especially, fits within ancient walls. But within those narrow lanes lies a world of symbols and memory. There is the Western Wall, the last remnant of the Second Temple. Thousands press their hands to its stones. Some weep. Others leave folded prayers in its cracks. The wall does not speak, but it listens. Just beyond, the golden dome of the rock shines beneath the sun. Here, according to tradition, Abraham prepared to sacrifice his son. And here, centuries later, Muslims believe the prophet began his night journey to the heavens. The rock beneath the dome is silent, but its story speaks across centuries. A short walk away lies the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, a dark, echoing structure of incense and candlelight. It is said to house both the hill of crucifixion and the tomb of resurrection. Pilgrims circle it with quiet awe, tracing steps they've only read about. Every gate in the old city has a name. The Damascus Gate, the Lion's Gate, the Golden Gate. And every name carries a memory of entry, of siege, of hope. The stones beneath your feet change in shade and shape. Some Roman, some Crusader, some Ottoman, but all are layered like history, like faith. In Jerusalem, story is not told. It is walked. Faith and fractured Jerusalem is a holy city. But holiness here is not simple. Three great faiths claim it, and each sees it through a different lens. For Jews, it is Zion, the place where the first temple stood, where the covenant dwelled, and where hope for return never faded, even in exile. For Christians, it is where Christ was crucified, buried, and resurrected. The center of a sacred drama that transformed the world. For Muslims, it is Al-Quds, the holy, the third holiest site after Mecca and Medina. A place of spiritual ascent and divine connection. These are not competing truths, but they do compete in practice. Jerusalem is divided sometimes by streets, sometimes by silence. Armenian quarters, Jewish quarters, Muslim quarters, Christian quarters. The city is sectioned, yet intertwined. And in that closeness, tension lives. There are shared hopes here, but also wounds. Wounds from politics, from fear, from centuries of promises broken and made again. The call to prayer echoes over church bells. Hebrew blessings rise with incense smoke, And behind every ritual, there is reverence, but also fragility. Faith here is real. But so is fracture, sieges and salvation. Jerusalem's history is not gentle. It has been conquered more than 40 times. Its walls torn down and rebuilt. Its people scattered and returned. Its skyline reshaped again and again. The Babylonians came first, destroying Solomon's temple. The Romans followed, razing the Second Temple, and later crucifying a man whose followers would reshape half the world. The Byzantines built churches. The Persians burned them. The Muslims entered peacefully. The Crusaders came with fire. The Ottomans ruled with order. The British marked it on maps. Each wave brought something new and left something behind, and still the city endured. In 1948, it was divided by war. In 1967, it was reunited by force. Since then, the battles have been quieter, but not absent. Fences now stand where walls once did. Checkpoints where gates once opened freely, and yet, amid the conflict, the soul of the city remains. It has never known peace for long, but it has always held the hope of it, a prayer in every brick for all the politics, all the history, all the conflict. People still come. They come not for power, but for presence, a child's first trip to the wall, an old woman tracing the stations of the cross, a man sitting silently near the dome, eyes closed, lips moving in prayer. They come with songs, with tears, with silence. Jerusalem pulls them across borders, across faiths, across time. It does not offer answers, only echoes, only reminders that faith is not always clear, that peace is not always easy, but that longing, the human longing for meaning, for place, for the sacred, is something we share, and so the city stands. Not in perfection, not in unity, but in resilience, a city of stone, yes, but also of spirit, a city with a prayer in every brick, and perhaps someday those prayers will bloom into something softer, something shared, because if peace can grow anywhere, perhaps it can grow here where the world comes to hope. Chapter 10. Venice, the floating republic on the edge of the Adriatic Sea, where water whispers against worn stone and fog rises like breath in the early light. There floats a city unlike any other. Venice. It was not carved from mountains or built upon hills. It was shaped by the tides, stitched together on hundreds of small islands, each one held above the water by wooden stilts driven deep into the clay below. A city born not from ambition, but from necessity. In the 5th century, as invaders swept across the mainland, families fled. They left behind fields, homes, and cities. And they came to the lagoon, a shallow place of reeds, fish, and salt air to find something new, something safer. There were no walls here, no firm ground, only shifting channels, soft mud, and the sound of oars cutting through still water. And yet, from this unpromising beginning, a miracle rose. Venice was never meant to thrive, but it did. It learned how to float not just above the sea, but above time. Its foundations were not stone, but survival. And from those foundations came one of the most enduring cities in human history. Gold, glass, and gondolas. Venice grew not by sword, but by sail. IT did not conquer land. It connected it through trade, through diplomacy, through a web of routes that stretched from Constantinople to Cairo, from Spain to China. In its markets, you could find silks from the East, spices from India, ivory from Africa, and amber from the North. But it was not just goods that moved through Venice. It was ideas, languages, customs, music. The air was rich with scent and sound. Ships glided silently through narrow canals, their cargo carefully tallied, their crews speaking in many tongues. On the docks, merchants weighed goods and promises with equal precision. Trust was a currency. So was beauty. Venetian glass became famous, clear, colored, delicate, strong. Mirrors that could hold a reflection without breaking. Chandeliers that sparkled like starlight. All made by hand, by breath, by fire. Gold leaf shimmered in cathedrals. Frescoes climbed walls. And always the gondolas moved long, sleek boats with curved prows and silent pilots. They floated through the city like shadows, slipping beneath bridges, past homes that leaned slightly, as if tired from centuries of leaning. Venice was not only a city. It was a theater, a mask, a performance of elegance, precision, and hidden power. The doges and diplomats at the heart of this floating stage was not a king or an emperor, but a republic. Venice was ruled by the doge, a leader chosen not by blood, but by careful election. The doge wore velvet and gold, and his power was great. But he was also watched, balanced by councils, advised by elders, limited by law. This was a city of merchants, of pragmatism, of contracts and codes. Power came not from divine right, but from reputation, from success in trade, in negotiation, in stability. The Venetian Republic lasted for over 1,000 years, longer than most empires. Its strength came not from armies, but from its ability to stay afloat in shifting tides, political, economic, and literal. It mastered diplomacy, made alliances where others made enemies, played East against West, Christian against Muslim, rival against rival, always watching, always weighing. Venetian ambassadors were among the most respected in Europe. Their reports detailed, objective, rich in insight, were sent back to the Doge like letters from the future. This republic was not perfect. It had its flaws, its slaves, its secrets, but it worked. For centuries, it held the city together like ropes binding a ship against the pull of storm and sea, art in every alley. But Venice was not only strategy. It was beauty. So much beauty. It was home to painters like Titian and Bellini, masters of color and light, who made the skin glow and the fabric breathe. Their canvases were drenched in warmth and humanity and reverence. Vivaldi was born here, the Red Priest who gave the world the four seasons and filled the air with violins that mimicked wind and rain and joy. The churches of Venice became sanctuaries of sound and space. Light danced through stained glass. Water lapped against stone outside, while choirs sang inside. The basilicas were heavy with incense and gold, and yet, somehow, still felt light. In the narrow streets, masks were carved with grace and mischief for carnival. for theater, for secrets. Venice loved mystery. It wore elegance like a veil. Art was not kept in galleries. It was in every alley, every square. Even the laundry lines, stretched between windows, fluttered like flags of quiet life. Venice understood that beauty wasn't something added. It was something woven in, still floating today. Venice faces the tides again, the sea rises. The foundations sink. Floodwaters enter piazzas. Tourists crowd bridges once crossed by traders. The city strains under its own legend, but it is still. Here, the gondolas still glide. The bells still ring. The fog still rolls in like a curtain at dusk. Locals sweep their steps. Children play in narrow campos. Fishermen cast their nets where merchants once anchored galleys. The rhythm of life continues. Soft, slow, aware, Venice remains because it adapts. Because it always has. Floating, adjusting, balancing.it is no longer the hub of the world. But it is still its mirror showing us what is fragile, what is lasting, what is worth preserving. This is Venice, the floating republic, the city of masks and mosaics, of echoes and elegance, a dream built on water, a promise still kept. Chapter 11. Paris, city of light and revolution, in the soft glow of candlelit salons, where wine breathed in crystal and words fell like sparks into the night. A revolution of thought was born. This was Paris in the 18th century, not yet. The city of barricades, but already the city of minds. Voltaire, with wit as sharp as steel, questioned kings. Rousseau pondered the nature of freedom. Diderot stitched together a world of knowledge into a single book, the Encyclopédie, symbol of reason's triumph over ignorance. These thinkers did not write from towers, but from tables in crowded cafes, where ink-stained napkins became drafts, and laughter often covered dangerous truths. Conversations wandered from philosophy to politics to poetry, and slowly, the world tilted toward something new. The Enlightenment did not explode. It simmered. It whispered across bridges and under balconies, until the people began to feel that, maybe, just maybe, they deserved more. Paris was becoming more than a city. It was becoming an idea. That truth could challenge power. That light could overcome shadow. That reason could guide the future. And in these quiet, glowing rooms, the foundations of revolution were laid not with bricks, but with words. Storming the Bastille then, one July morning in 1789, the simmer turned to flame, the Bastille. A fortress prison, grim and gray, stood as a symbol of tyranny. Few were held inside. But that didn't matter. It was not the cells that mattered. It was what they meant. Crowds surged through the narrow streets. They carried no banners, only anger, only hunger, for bread, for justice, for change. They stormed the gates, fought the guards, and when it was over, the Bastille stood in ruins. Not just broken in stone, but in spirit. The French Revolution had begun. Paris became its heartbeat. The streets filled with songs and slogans. The guillotine rose. So did fear, but so did hope. It was a time of extremes, of liberty and blood, of speeches and silence, of dreams that flew too close to the sun. The city pulsed with energy, with tension, with a belief that a better world could be built though the cost would be high. Other nations watched wide-eyed. Monarchs trembled. And Paris, always poetic, always proud, became something more, a warning, a guide, a question. What does it mean to be free? That question, asked in the shadow of the Bastille, still lingers, the houseman. Rebuild years passed. Revolutions came and went. Kings returned. Empires rose. And still, Paris stood, but it had changed. The city was tired. Its streets narrow and dark. Its neighborhoods tangled like knots. Then came George's new houseman appointed by Napoleon. 3 with a task as grand as it was impossible. Remake Paris. He did not rebuild it gently. He carved it. Winding alleys became wide boulevards. The air cleared. Light poured in. Trees were planted in rows. Parks appeared where smoke once gathered. Sewers were buried deep. Water flowed clean. And the city, once medieval, became modern. It was not without loss. Entire communities were swept away. Histories vanished beneath stone and steel. But something new emerged, a city of curves and clarity, of movement and pause. Haussmann's Paris is the one we know today. The long avenues, the cream-colored buildings, the iron balconies, the glowing lamps that turn every evening into. A painting. It was called the City of Light, not just for its lamps, but for its vision, for the clarity it sought, for the way it reflected a world stepping into the modern age. And in this new Paris, beauty became not decoration, but structure. The city was not just seen. It was felt. Art, romance, resistance. But Paris never stopped changing, never stopped feeling. In the 19th century, the Impressionists arrived. Monet painted light itself on water, on lilies, on fog. Renoir captured laughter. Degas caught dancers mid-spin. Their studios were tiny, their colors bold, their subjects everyday. And through them, Paris became a gallery with no walls. Writers came too. Hugo with his cathedral. Zola with his fire. Later, Hemingway with his cafes. Fitzgerald with his longing. They didn't just write in Paris. They wrote of it. They breathed it in and sent it out again, dressed in ink. Then the war. In World War II, Paris fell. German troops marched through its streets. Flags changed. Fear returned. But so did resistance. It came quietly. Messages tucked into loaves of bread. Radio signals sent from basements. Names whispered and remembered. The assistance was not one face. It was many. And together they kept the city's soul from breaking. When the Allies approached, Hitler ordered Paris destroyed. But the city refused. A German general, moved by beauty or conscience, disobeyed. Paris was spared. Again and when the bells rang to mark its liberation, they did not sound like victory. They sounded like return, a flame that doesn't flicker. Paris has known glory. It has known grief. It has seen kings crowned and heads fall. It has been painted and bombed, sung and silenced, but it remains, not because it is perfect, but because it glows with something soft, something defiant. A light that does not flicker, even when the winds rise. In spring, the cherry blossoms fall along the Seine like pink confetti. In winter, the lights shimmer across rain-soaked streets. In every cafe, someone writes. Someone dreams. Children ride carousels beside cathedrals. Artists still sketch along the river. A violin plays beneath the arches of a bridge. Paris does not demand attention. It invites it. It does not try to impress. It simply is a city of revolution and romance, of ideas and resistance, of past and promise. It has been the cradle of enlightenment, the stage of revolution, the home of art and hope, and tonight, as its lamps glow across the rooftops, the city of light still waits, still burns, still believes. Chapter 12. London, the Empire's Echo. London began as a whisper on the river, a Roman outpost called Londinium, nestled by the curve of the Thames. It was a place of trade, of tides, of passing footsteps rather than permanence. But even then, the land seemed to promise something more. The river gave life. Goods flowed in from the seas beyond. And though empires would rise and fall, London remained. A city not carved in marble, but built in brick and soot and patience. As centuries passed, the outpost became a village. The village, a town. The town, a capital. By the time William the Conqueror arrived in 1066, London was ready. He crowned himself in Westminster Abbey, not by force, but by tradition, a crown placed in silence beside a river that never stopped moving. Through plague and fire, London endured. The Great Fire of 1666 took much of the city, but it also cleared the way for renewal. Christopher Wren rebuilt the skyline with domes and spires, including the Great St. Paul's Cathedral, rising like hope from ash, from riverbank to palace, from fog to flourish. London's rise was not sudden. It was tidal, a slow, steady pull toward power, shaped not just by force, but by survival. The Blitz and the backbone. In the fall of 1940, the bombs came night after night. The sky growled. Sirens wailed. London went dark. But the people stayed. The Blitz, a campaign of terror. From the air shattered glass and stone, but not spirit. Families huddled in underground stations beneath the city they built. Children clutched gas, masks. Mothers sang softly, not because they weren't afraid, but because they were. The Thames burned in reflection. Entire neighborhoods disappeared. But each morning, the city opened its eyes, cleared its streets, lit its kettles, continued. Winston Churchill called it the finest hour. But it wasn't just about speeches. It was about quiet defiance. Milk, delivered even as rubble crumbled. Letters posted as smoke drifted. St. Paul stood through it all, dust-covered, flame-ringed, but whole. Its dome became a symbol, a silent vow. This city bends, but does not break. The war ended. The damage remained. But so did the backbone, the stubborn resilience of a city that has always rebuilt itself, stone by stone, life by life, a global crossroads at its height. London was the center of the world not in myth, but in map. The British Empire stretched across continents. The sun never set on it. They said in London's clock tower chimed through the time zones like a heartbeat heard across oceans, from India to Jamaica, Australia to Africa. The ships came in. Tea, tobacco, cotton, ideas, and people so. Many people, each bringing their languages, stories, spices, and dreams. The streets of London became a mosaic, a market of voices, a network of contradictions, grandeur and struggle, empire and resistance, colonizer and colonized, all passing under the same gray sky. The empire would fade. The map would change. But London, as a crossroads, remained. Its trains ran outward, its influence inward. Writers from Nigeria, musicians from the Caribbean, scientists from Pakistan, artists from everywhere. The city that once ruled the world now welcomed it unevenly, imperfectly, but openly. A became a mirror, not just of power, but of plurality, of what happens when history meets humanity in narrow lanes and wide streets, in curry houses and cobbled squares, in accents layered like centuries, monarchs, markets, and music. London wears many crowns, the one atop Buckingham Palace quiet, ceremonial, tradition-wrapped, speaks of continuity. Royal births, weddings, losses, the changing of guards and the stillness of a balcony wave. A monarchy both ancient and always evolving, but beyond the palace gates, other forces shape the city. In the East End, markets spill with life. Voices call out prices. Fruit gleams. Fabrics flutter. Commerce hums, old and alive, along the Thames. The Globe Theatre once rang with laughter and verse. Shakespeare's words danced in the candlelight stories of kings and fools, love and war, all staged beside the mud of the riverbank. And then came Abbey Road. The Beatles crossed a zebra-striped street and changed music forever. London pulsed with rhythm. The Rolling Stones, Bowie, Queen, their sounds rolled from pubs to record stores, shaping generations, from punk in Camden to jazz in Soho, from grime in the underground to symphonies in the Royal Albert Hall. Here, the crown and the commoner coexist. The past and the pulse. A city of ceremony, but also of song. The fog never settles. London today is both memory and motion. It remembers in museums and statues, in plaques on walls, in street names that echo empire and revolt alike, but it also moves. New towers rise beside Tudor homes. New languages fill the air. The fog no longer comes like it once did, but the feeling of drifting time remains. The tube still rumbles below. The rain still falls gently against red buses. Pigeons still gather at Trafalgar Square. Life continues layered, living, light and shadow woven together. It is a city that reinvents quietly, in tech, in fashion, in thought. Yet it never forgets. A protest on Westminster Bridge, a poem in the underground, a quiet prayer in a park. London is not a city that boasts. It breathes. It watches. It welcomes. And when the world feels uncertain, it remains not as a symbol of certainty, but of continuity. This is London, the empire's echo, the monarch's mirror, the everyman's home, not perfect, not peaceful, but persistent, and always softly alive. Chapter 13. Carthage, the city that challenged Rome. Long before the Caesars ruled and Rome cast its long shadow across the world, there was Carthage, a city born not from conquest, but from the sea, founded by Phoenician settlers from the eastern Mediterranean. Carthage began as a quiet harbor town on the North African coast, but it grew quickly, cleverly, and confidently. Its people were sailors, traders, craftsmen. They carved a civilization not in stone, but in motion, in sails, in spice, in silver. Carthage became a maritime marvel. Its ships reached Spain, Sicily, and beyond. Its harbors curved in perfect semicircles built to hold fleets like hands cradling pearls. Its merchants spoke in many tongues. Its gods looked toward the horizon. The city did not boast empires. It thrived on exchange, on trade winds and treaties, on alliances woven across seas. Gold flowed in. Ideas traveled with goods. Temples rose not to emperors, but to Baal and Tanit, ancient deities tied to earth and sky, and yet, beneath its grace, there was grit. Carthage did not fear the waves. It mastered them. And as its wealth grew, so did its pride and its rivals. One in particular, Rome, across the water. Another city was rising with iron, with legions, with hunger. And between them stretched the Mediterranean, not wide enough for both to rule. Hannibal's march, when the clash came, it came in waves, 3 great wars across a century. The Punic Wars. At the heart of the second, a name etched itself into legend: Hannibal, a Carthaginian general, bold beyond measure. Raised to hate Rome. Trained not just in battle, but in vision. He saw the impossible and said, "Let's begin." He did not sail to Rome. He walked from Iberia, over rivers and ridges, through the towering Alps, in snow and silence, with soldiers, with cavalry, and with elephants, great gray beasts, snorting in cold, carrying war on their backs. It was madness. It was brilliance. He lost many on the way. But what remained was enough. At Cani, in southern Italy, Hannibal delivered one of the most devastating defeats Rome would ever suffer. Tens of thousands of Roman soldiers fell. The Republic trembled, but Hannibal never took Rome itself. He waited, hoped for allies, reinforcements. A sign. It didn't come. Rome endured, adapted, fought back, and slowly Hannibal's grip slipped. He returned to Carthage, fought again, and finally fell. But his march, that daring arc through mountains, and legend remained, not just a campaign, a symbol of courage, of defiance, of how far one man would go to challenge an empire. Salt and ashes Rome never forgot. Decades passed. Peace, uneasy and cracked, held for a time. But Rome grew stronger. Carthage, though wounded, recovered. Trade resumed. Walls were rebuilt, and that, to Rome, was thread enough. In 149 BCE, the third and final Punic War began. Rome laid siege to Carthage. Not for months. For years, the city fought back, starving but unbending. Streets turned to battlegrounds. Fires lit the night. The people craftsmen, farmers, mothers became soldiers, but in the end, it was not enough. Rome broke through. They did not occupy. They destroyed. Carthage was burned. Its libraries, its temples, its homes turned to ash. Survivors were sold into slavery. The soil, it is said, was salted to curse the land, to make it barren, to erase what once was. It was not just conquest. It was obliteration, but memory is harder to burn than stone. Even as the city vanished, the name remained. In fear, in admiration, in awe, Rome had won. But the echo of Carthage lingered soft, defiant, and alive, the rise beneath the rubble. Carthage did not stay buried. In time, the Romans themselves rebuilt it as a colony, as a symbol of renewal. New roads crossed old ruins. Baths and forums rose where temples once stood. Roman columns pierced Phoenician soil. It became one of the largest cities in the Western Empire, grand, wealthy, adorned with villas and aqueducts. Emperors walked. Streets where ashes once lay. Later, Christianity took root. Churches replaced shrines. Carthage became a beacon of early Christian thought, home to thinkers like Tertullian and Cyprian, voices that helped shape the new faith even after Rome fell. Carthage remained. It passed to the Vandals, then the Byzantines, then the Umayyads. Each empire added layers. Each left footprints. The city changed names, changed hands. But the foundation, the spirit, was always there. Today, its ruins lie quiet near Tunis. Columns still stand. Mosaics still whisper color. The sea, just beyond, still carries wind across stone. Carthage is no longer a capital, but it is still a witness, legacy of defiance. There is something enduring in cities that rise, fall, and rise again. Carthage teaches not through conquest, but through contrast. It was not Rome. It did not build on fear. It built on flow of goods, of culture, of thought, and when threatened, it stood. Not forever, but fiercely. Its name became a warning to some, a rallying cry to others. In every city that's been broken and rebuilt, you can hear its echo. In every battle fought for dignity, in every stand taken against greater power, there is something of Carthage, even in ruin. It resists being forgotten. Its harbor, though filled in, still outlines the curve of a civilization that once danced with the sea. Its memory, though scorched, still burns not with fire, but with firelight. Carthage does not ask for pity. It offers a reminder. Not all empires end quietly. Some leave behind more than ruins. Some leave behind a whisper of courage, of craft, of a city that once dared to rival Rome. Chapter 14. Timbuktu, the city of gold and books, in the heart of the West African Sahel, where the wind shapes dunes and the sun paints the earth in gold and rust. There once rose a city that shimmered not with stone or steel, but with legend. Timbuktu. Medieval Europe. It was little more than a name whispered through trade routes, drawn on maps where the ink ran out. A place so distant, so hidden, it became myth. A city of unimaginable wealth, where gold flowed like water and knowledge grew like trees. But Timbuktu was not a fantasy. It was real, shaped not by myth-makers, but by merchants, mystics, and minds. It stood near the edge of the Sahara, where camel caravans arrived like waves from the north, their bells clinking softly beneath loads of salt, cloth, and stories. Here, where river met desert, trade became settlement. And settlement, over time, became civilization, built in adobe and faith. Timbuktu blended into its landscape. No towering palaces, no marble columns, just soft-edged homes, mosques of sun-dried earth, and alleyways quiet with dust, but beneath its modest walls lived something precious, not just gold, but ideas. And in time, Timbuktu would become more than a marketplace. It would become a beacon, a city not of noise, but of knowledge, a marketplace of minds in its golden age. Timbuktu thrived not just on salt, though that was precious, not just on gold, though that too flowed in from the mines of Mali, but on minds on the exchange of wisdom, verse, and law. It was part of the Mali Empire, one of the richest realms of its time. Under rulers like Mansa Musa, who once crossed the Sahara with so much gold, he disrupted economies along the way the city blossomed. Caravans brought wealth, and wealth brought scholars. Timbuktu's streets echoed with footsteps and thought. Markets bustled with goods, ivory, leather, millet, copper, but just as often with knowledge. A man might sell salt in the morning and study astronomy by night. A boy might memorize the Quran by day and debate philosophy at dusk. At its height, the city was home to tens of thousands. Many were students. Others were scribes, judges, or imams. There were poets and jurists, herbalists and historians. And they came not just from Mali, but from across Africa, the Arab world, even Spain. The Sankar Mosque, simple in form, became one of the greatest centers of learning in the Islamic world. Not a university in the modern sense, but something deeper. A place where knowledge was sacred and study, a form of worship. Here, learning was not stored in towers. It was lived, passed hand to hand, voice to voice, ink to paper. The currency of Timbuktu was not just trade, it was thought, the libraries of the desert beneath mud-brick roofs and behind unmarked doors. Thousands of manuscripts slept. They were wrapped in goatskin, inked on papyrus, tucked into niches cooled by desert air. Some were fragile. Some were luminous. All were precious. These books were not stored in vaults. They were kept in family homes, passed down like heirlooms. Some were copied by candlelight. Others arrived by caravan. They came from Cairo, Fez, Andalusia. They were written in Arabic, Songhai, Tamashek, and their subjects were vast: law and linguistics, medicine and mathematics, astronomy, botany, history, theology, philosophy, even love poems and tales of travel. In a time when much of Europe was struggling to preserve the past, Timbuktu was preserving and producing the present. Some collections numbered in the thousands. A single scholar might own a library as large as a small city's. And these were not books to be hoarded. They were studied, debated, expanded upon. This was Africa's great intellectual legacy, not carved in stone, but inked in thought. A quiet revolution written beneath the desert sun, and though sand and time threatened them, many of these manuscripts would endure. Hidden, buried, preserved in silence, waiting for the world to remember, from legend to silence, but no city escapes. Time, the trade routes that once pulsed with caravans, began to fade. New paths, shaped by ocean and empire, drew wealth elsewhere. And as commerce declined, so too did the golden hum of Timbuktu. The Moroccan invasion of 1591 shattered its autonomy. Scholars were exiled. Books were seized. The great centers of learning dimmed. And the city, once so vibrant, became quiet, not empty. Just changed, the desert crept closer. The world looked away. And Timbuktu slipped back into myth, not for what it was, but for what it had been. Even maps marked it with wonder. Here be riches, here be mystery, but few came to see, and yet it never truly vanished. Families still whispered stories. Some still studied. Some still taught. And the manuscripts, hidden in trunks and attics, slept on, a city left to dust. But not erased, golden memory today. Timbuktu does not dazzle. It does not rise high. It does not call loudly, but it remains. Mosques still stand Sankar, Jingerber. Sidi Yahya, their minarets leaning slightly, like old men nodding in thought. The call to prayer still drifts over rooftops made of earth and memory. The manuscripts, many rescued during times of unrest, now rest in safer hands in libraries and archives in digital forms. Still read, still revered, Timbuktu is no longer a capital, but it is still a cradle of knowledge, a cradle of Africa's intellectual heritage, a cradle of quiet brilliance. And when the wind moves through the alleyways, lifting grains of sand, it does not bring only dust. It brings echoes of scholars debating under stars, of pages turning in candlelight, of a city that once believed learning was sacred. Timbuktu is proof that Africa has always been a continent of thinkers, that civilization is not measured by marble, but by memory, that books can outlast empires, and that even in silence, a city can still shine. Chapter 15. Delhi, the throne of many dynasties, beneath the skies of northern India, where the Yamuna River bends and the earth has held empires. Delhi rises not as one city, but as many over 1,000 years. It has been built and broken, conquered and crowned. Historians call it the city of 7 Delhis, each layered upon the last like memories in stone. But in truth, it is more than 7. It is uncountable, each dynasty, leaving behind its own breath, its own design, its own rhythm. The Tomars came first, carving their mark into the hills. Then the Chauhans, building Killa Rai Pathora, the first fortress. After them, the Delhi Sultanate, erecting towers and mosques with calligraphy woven into red sandstone, and then others, the Khiljas, the Tughlaqs, The Lodis all rose and fell. Each left behind ruins that still whisper in the wind. Tombs cracked by time. Arches standing in lonely fields. Stone paths that end in silence, but the city never ended. Delhi, like the earth beneath it, endured. It learned to adapt, to reshape itself without losing its soul. And as rulers came from across deserts and mountains, Delhi welcomed them not with surrender, but with quiet absorption. It grew, layer by layer, dynasty by dynasty, a city of rebirths. A city with one soul. The Mughals and marble dreams in the 16th century. The Mughals arrived not as raiders, but as builders. They brought with them Central Asian grace, Persian poetry, and an eye for beauty that stretched beyond utility. Babur first planted gardens. Humayun dreamed in symmetry. And then came Shah Jahan, the emperor of marble dreams, Shah Jahan, who would build the Taj Mahal in Agra, turned his eyes toward Delhi. He envisioned a city of perfection, a city of balance, and he named it Shahjahanabad, now known as Old. Delhi, the red fort, rose with its massive crimson walls, carved with floral patterns and inlaid with precious stones. Within its walls, the Diwan-i-Khas, where he would sit beneath a canopy of gold and whisper the words, "If there is paradise on earth, it is this, it is this, it is this." Nearby, the Jama Masjid stretched toward the sky domes curved like the heavens, minarets watching over the city like sentinels of prayer. Delhi under the Mughals was not only a capital, it was a canvas, with gardens aligned to reflect paradise, with water channels that murmured through marble courtyards, with a skyline softened by domes, but even dreams fade. After Shah Jahan came war. Aurangzeb's strict reign dimmed the city's glow. The Mughal power waned, and Delhi once again became vulnerable to the ambitions of others. Still, the architecture remained. Still, the marble held moonlight. Still, Delhi. Remembered, red fort, white rule by the 19th century. Delhi's throne no longer belonged to emperors, but to officials in distant Britain. The red fort, once the seat of Mughal majesty, now flew the Union Jack. British boots echoed through its marble halls, and Delhi became the symbolic heart of a colony it never chose to serve. The British moved their capital from Calcutta to Delhi in 1911, not to honor it, but to control it. They built New Delhi beside the old city of broad avenues, white domes and imperial distance. Lutyens' Delhi, they called it. Designed by Edwin Lutyens, the new capital was meant to impose order. Rajpath, the king's way, ran straight to the viceroy's house. Government buildings stood like monuments to foreign rule, but even in control, the British could not erase Delhi's past. Ruins stood beside their palaces. Local bazaars pulsed just beyond their gardens. And under the surface, a movement stirred. The freedom struggle grew. Leaders gathered. Marches began. The old city watched weary, but waiting. In 1857, during the First War of Independence, Delhi had already risen in revolt. And though crushed then, the memory of resistance never left, and so, under colonial shadow, Delhi simmered, quietly preparing for its next transformation. Partition and pain in 1947, independence came. But it did not come gently. The British left. India was free. But the land was split. Partition. A line was drawn on maps, but also on hearts. And Delhi stood at the edge of both countries and sorrow. From across the new border, trains arrived filled with refugees with lives packed, in bundles with children clinging to mothers. With stories spoken in silence, Hindus and Sikhs came from Lahore. Muslims left for Pakistan. The city's population swelled. Its pain did too. Neighborhoods changed. Friendships fractured. There was joy in freedom, but it was joy laced with mourning. Delhi, like the rest of India, had to rebuild not just in bricks, but in spirit. Camps filled the parks. New homes were carved from old. Languages shifted. Accents blended. And through it all, Delhi remained absorbing loss, welcoming life from parliament to prayer rooms, from protest songs to whispered lullabies. The city took on the burden of a newborn nation and wore it with quiet strength. It had seen the rise and fall of dynasties. Now it stood at the dawn of democracy, and still the Yamuna flowed. As it always had, India's living capital today, Delhi breathes in contradictions. Its metro trains glide above ruins older than most nations. Its skyscrapers cast shadows on Mughal tombs. It is a place where past and present sleep in the same bed. In Chandni Chowk, rickshaws weave through spice-scented alleys. In Connaught Place, suits pass by colonial pillars. In Okla, neon signs flash above sari stalls. And in Lodi Gardens, couples walk quietly among the domes of forgotten kings. The city has grown not in circles, but in layers. Old Delhi, New Delhi, South Delhi, satellite towns, each with its own rhythm, each carrying a piece of the whole. It is noisy. It is tender. It is polluted. It is pure. It is a city that celebrates Holi with color, Eid with feasts, Diwali with lights, and Christmas with song. A city where parliament debates in Hindi, English, Urdu, Punjabi, and more, each word adding to the mosaic. And through it all, Delhi still changes. It protests. It creates. It remembers. It reinvents. This is Delhi, the throne of many dynasties, the mirror of India itself, not perfect, not peaceful, but alive, a city with 7 lives, a city with one soul. Chapter 16, Damascus, the city that remembers everything, in the shadow of Mount Kazan, where olive trees stretch toward a sky brushed with dust and time, there lies a city older than memory. Damascus. It doesn't shout its history. It simply wears it in every stone, every archway, every whispered prayer that floats above ancient rooftops. For more than 11,000 years, people have lived here, and not just passed through, but stayed, raised children, built homes, buried their elders, worshipped their gods. The world calls Damascus the oldest continually inhabited city on earth, and when you walk its streets, it's hard to argue. The air itself feels layered. Every breeze carries a story. Canaanites once ruled here. Then the Arameans. Then the Assyrians, the Persians, the Greeks. The Romans built straight roads and tall columns. The Byzantines followed with churches. And then came the Arabs, who brought minarets and call to prayer. Each wave left behind something. Not erased, just added to. The city does not forget. It is a living palimpsest where yesterday is never truly over, and tomorrow is always shaped. By the past. To enter Damascus is to step into a place where history does not sleep. It walks beside you, quiet, constant, alive. Umayyad grandeur in the 7th century, Damascus became something more than ancient. It became imperial when the Umayyad Caliphate chose it as their capital. The city rose in splendor. From this desert edge, they ruled an empire that stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the edges of India. And at its heart stood one of Islam's greatest architectural wonders, the Umayyad Mosque, built upon layers of belief, once a Roman temple to Jupiter, then a Christian basilica dedicated to John the Baptist. The mosque was not a replacement. It was a continuation, a transformation. Its courtyard stretches wide beneath open sky. Marble gleams beneath bare feet. Pigeons circle minarets shaped like candles. And inside, gold and mosaics shimmer with vines, cities, and rivers images. Of paradise that ask for no words, only breath. It is said the head of John the Baptist rests within its walls. It is said the prophet Muhammad once stood here. It is said the future will return here, in another age, beneath another sky. But what is not said, only felt, is that this place holds stillness, a kind of timeless reverence. It belongs to no one, yet welcomes all. The Umayyads left their mark not with monuments alone, but with movement, roads, administration, language, and faith, all radiating outward from this city of stone and soul. Damascus became the pulse of an empire. And that pulse still echoes. Markets and memory woven into the bones of Damascus are its souks-covered markets that stretch like rivers of scent and sound. Al-Hamidiyya souk begins at Roman arches and winds into darkness lit by shafts of sunlight. Here, silk sways beside spices. Perfumes drift past sandals. The voices of sellers rise like music old and rhythmic. There is something eternal in these stalls. You might find an iPhone case beside a 500-year-old brass lamp, a Coca-Cola fridge beside a basket of cardamom. Time does not march here. It mingles. In ancient days, goods came by camel from India, by ship from Venice, by caravan from Africa. Frankincense, myrrh, indigo, sugar. Stories passed with them, stories wrapped in parchment. Folded into rugs, baked into sweets, each corner holds a scent. Roasted pistachios, jasmine tea, old wood, warm bread, and beyond the shops, deeper still, lie the home's courtyards hidden behind carved doors, fountains murmuring in shade, children's laughter echoing from tiled walls. This was the rhythm of Damascus, not only prayer and politics, but people, talking, trading, living. The souks are not just markets. They are memory made visible, war's long shadow, but even the oldest cities are not immune to pain. In recent years, Damascus, like much of Syria, has felt war. Not once, but over and over. civil unrest, bombings, checkpoints, silence. Streets once alive with music became quiet. Families fled. Schools closed. And the oldest city on earth became a place of fear. The Umayyad Mosque was damaged. Souks were shuttered. Mosaics cracked. Dust covered memory, but even in war, life clung on. Some stayed. They opened small cafes, taught children, repaired books, cleaned the stones of shrines. They kept traditions alive not in grand gestures, but in small ones, a plate of food shared, a door repaired, a prayer whispered, because in Damascus, memory is not so easily destroyed. It seeps into the walls. It waits in the shadows. It carries forward. Yes, the scars are deep, the grief endless. But the soul of the city, though battered, is not broken. It has seen invasions before. It has survived, and somewhere beneath the rubble, the jasmine still grows, a city still breathing today. Damascus does not dazzle. It does not seek headlines. It does not pretend to be healed, but it breathes. In the early mornings, shopkeepers sweep their steps. A call to prayer echoes through fog. Birds rustle in fig trees. And the city, though slower now, stirs. Children play among ruins, their laughter defiant. Scholars meet in libraries, their pens scratching softly on pages. Art returns in murals, and music, and jasmine, always jasmine, blooms again. The old city still wraps itself in stone and sun. Minarets still rise above rooftops. Lamps still flicker in narrow alleys. And from the windows of ancient houses, light pours out, not bright, but warm. Damascus remembers everything, but it also forgives. It does not rush to forget, nor to move on. It holds memory like an heirloom, not as a weight, but as a guide. It teaches that survival is not just endurance, it is adaptation, and that history is not only found in books or museums, but in breath, in tea, in cracked tiles, in song. This is Damascus, a city not of endings, but of echoes, a city that remembers and still gently remains. Chapter 17. Tenochtitlan, the Venice of the Americas, in the high valley of central Mexico, where mountains cradle the clouds and the sun glows golden on water, once rose a city unlike any the world had seen. Tenochtitlan, built not on land, but on a lake, not along rivers, but above them. It was an island city floating, shining, alive. The Aztecs or Mexica came here guided by prophecy. They saw it as sacred, chosen by the gods. In the marshes of Lake Texcoco, they saw an eagle perched on a cactus, devouring a serpent. And so they drove stakes into the soft lake bed, wove reed mats, piled earth. They made the land. Themselves, Chinampas floating gardens blossomed with maize, beans, squash, and flowers. Canals wove through the city like veins, and canoes glided beneath arching causeways. Engineers laid out roads, aqueducts, dikes, marvels of planning that rivaled anything in the old world. Temples rose like mountains from the water, their stairs steep, their peaks catching the sunrise. It was a city born not from conquest, but creation, a place made possible by vision, by labor, and by belief. The people walked narrow stone paths surrounded by lilies. Children played near shimmering waters. Priests climbed temple steps as incense curled into the sky. This was Tenochtitlan, an island that did not merely survive nature, it shaped it. Empire in bloom from the heart of Tenochtitlan. The Aztec Empire bloomed not gently, but with force. It was a city of warriors, of priests, of poets, and of planners. Tribute poured in from across the valley: obsidian, feathers, cacao, jade. Cities bowed. Alliances shifted. Armies marched outward in spirals of conquest. At the center stood the Templo Mayor, the twin-templed pyramid that honored both Huitzilopochtli, god of sun and war, and Tlaloc, god of rain. There, rituals beat in time with the heartbeat of the empire. Sacrifice was not cruelty, it was cosmology. It kept the sun alive, the world in balance, the gods satisfied, but beyond the blood was beauty. Tenochtitlan had zoos filled with jaguars and monkeys, botanical gardens blooming with exotic plants, a class of scribes who wrote history in picture and glyph, merchants who traveled for months to trade with distant lands. Its population rivaled the greatest cities of Europe. Its palaces gleamed, its markets bustled, its people engineers, craftsmen, dancers, and dreamers walked with purpose under banners of turquoise and gold. Here, empire was not just built with stone. It was sustained by rhythm of festival, of ceremony, of sun and moon and maize. Tenochtitlan did not whisper. It sang. The Spanish arrival in 1519. A stranger arrived on distant shores. Hearn and Court S. A conquistador with steel armor, foreign. Gods and a hunger that could not be sated by gold alone. First, he was greeted with gifts. The Aztecs had never seen horses or guns or skin that pale. Some believed he might be a god returned, a shadow of ancient prophecy. He marched inland with allies and ambition, drawn like a moth to the flame of Tenochtitlan's splendor. When he arrived, he crossed the great causeways into a city that shimmered above water, and he wrote that it surpassed anything in Spain. But I turned to greed, suspicion, violence. The Spanish seized the emperor, Moctezuma. Tensions flared. Rebellions rose. Streets once peaceful turned to battlegrounds. The canals ran red. Court S was driven out once. But he returned with more soldiers, more weapons, and more allies among native enemies of the Aztecs. What followed was not a battle. It was a siege. Water supplies were cut. Food ran out. Smallpox swept through the city, brought by unseen hands. The people fell, stone by stone. The temples collapsed. The markets burned. The songs died. Tenochtitlan fell, not because it was weak, but because it had never imagined such hunger. From ruins, a new city. When the Spanish stood in the ashes of Tenochtitlan, they did not pause to mourn. They razed what remained, tore down temples, smashed idols, buried aqueducts, and from the ruins they built a new city, Mexico City. Streets were laid atop old canals. Churches replaced shrines. Plazas were paved where pyramids once stood, but beneath the surface, Tenochtitlan never vanished. Its stones were reused in cathedrals, in palaces, in the very foundations of the colonial world. Its memory lingered in the names of streets, in the rhythm of Nahuatl words spoken in marketplaces, in the patterns of city blocks that still follow Aztec design. Some parts survived even physically. Templo Mayor, once lost, lay sleeping beneath the metropolitan cathedral until it was unearthed centuries later. Skeletons, sculptures, offerings. Proof that the city had not been erased. Only hidden, Mexico City rose, but it stood on the shoulders of something older, something proud, and in time, the conquerors themselves became part of that story, not as victors alone, but as inheritors of a layered place, roots beneath the concrete. Today, Mexico City is vast, chaotic, alive. It pulses with noise and movement, a place of art, food, traffic, music, politics. But deep below its streets, Tenochtitlan breathes. In the Zeke Hollow, tourists take photos beside ruins. School children walk past murals of eagle warriors and moon goddesses. In local markets, ancient foods are still cooked in ancient ways. In museums, masks and manuscripts speak of times before conquest, but more than that, in the hearts of people. The Aztec spirit remains. It lives in stories told at kitchen tables, in pride passed from grandmother to grandchild, in the way young artists paint jaguar gods onto city walls, in the Nahuatl names that flow through daily life like water through a forgotten canal. Tenochtitlan is not remembered for how it fell. It is remembered for how it lived, with brilliance, with balance, with vision. It teaches that greatness does not always rise on dry ground, that civilization can bloom from marshes, that identity can survive even fire and steel. This was Tenochtitlan, not a myth, not a ruin, but a root deep, alive, and still growing.